Our goal, as you know, is to figure out equilibrium in this market, a perfectly competitive market. The conditions of perfect competition have led us to understand that perfectly competitive firms treat price as given. Now, what we want to do is think about supply. That's what we're trying to construct here. We built demand a long time ago. We're trying to think about a supply curve in this industry. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a supply curve for a particular firm first, and then we'll aggregate up because we got lots of these firms, right? So our goal is to derive a supply function for a single firm that's in a competitive market. And for us, just to be clear, we're calling it a perfectly competitive industry. Once we know that, we can aggregate up. Now, again, we'll start with some notation. We're going to let lowercase q sub I be defined as the individual output of firm I. And we're going to let capital Q be defined as market output of all firms. And what that means is that I know market output then is just going to be equal to the summation for I equals 1 to n, where there are n players in this industry, of the individual outputs of each of these firms. Where do these outputs come from? Well, that's what we're doing. We're to build a supply curve to show the optimal response of an individual player. And once I figure out the response function for an individual player, then I'm going to sum across these response functions, and I'll have a market supply curve. All right, so let's recall that for profit maximization, we wanted to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. That is, the individual firm would search for the output level. Firm has no control over price. Price is given. Would search for the output level where the marginal revenue of the last unit produced is just equal to the marginal cost of the last unit produced. Graphically, we put dollars and cents or price on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, we'll put lowercase q, representing the individual firm. And we know the marginal cost curve for that firm looks something like this. Now, remember, the marginal cost was actually U-shaped when we built the cost curves. But we were able to determine earlier that for any parametrically given price, the firm doesn't really care about the downward sloping part of the marginal cost curve. The action happens where the marginal cost curve is sloping up. So, you know, this curve really does have this part here, but I'm just not really showing it going forward. All right? So we'll go forward and just take these off here just to get the clutter factor a little bit reduced. Marginal cost, remember, was the slope of the total cost function, the derivative of cost, the change in cost for a change in output, and we want to set that equal to marginal revenue. For a firm in a perfectly competitive market, we know that the firm faces a price from the market, some price P0, and that is in fact the marginal revenue for the firm. How do we know that? Well, we established that they are price takers. For every given unit of production, they get exactly price. Think about, you can say, well, how's that work? Like, well, I guarantee you, take the largest corn farmer in Illinois, and have her double her production. If the largest corn farmer doubled her production, what would be the impact on the price of the Chicago Board of Trade? Nothing. It'd be like a little bug landing on a lake. The ripple effect would be small. Now, if Honda were to double its production of Accords, there would be some impact on market prices. Okay, but that's a different game. That's what we're going to talk about later. When there's a small number of producers, their output decisions can actually have big impact. Here, we're talking about a special case where firms are relatively so small that their output decision doesn't impact price. And so for this particular farmer, if corn is $3.40 a bushel, for every extra bushel of corn that is walking across the horizontal axis, the output for this particular farmer, as she produced more and more corn, every extra unit will get exactly what the market price was. So that's why we have that horizontal line at we call it marginal revenue, the change in revenue. And of course, this means for profit maximization that the firm will want to set marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and we'll call this Q star sub 0, associated with the price of P0. Now, we don't know much about profits in this situation, but since I'm a little bit sloppy here, I'll put this on here just to make sure that we remember we're in the short run. In the short run, the firm can't really change its plant and equipment. It's stuck in this industry. This is the profit maximized output. You would ask the question, well, what if they're losing a lot of money, Larry? Well, we've already worked through something called the shutdown condition. which would tell us that even though you're losing money, sometimes it's important for you to continue to keep operating because you're earning enough money from your operating cash to pay back some of that fixed cost. And the rule for that for us, if you recall, was the price just had to be above average variable cost. Let me remind you, if price is greater than or equal to average variable cost, then you do not shut down. Only when the price falls below average variable cost would you say, I'm locking my doors and I'm waiting till a broker calls and tells me, I found a buyer for your corn acreage or your craft plant on the edge of town, whatever the industry is that you're dealing with. So in this situation, I now got a point that tells me for this particular price exactly how much the firm would want to produce. Okay, let's go a long, long, long time back. Module 1 of Course 1. We introduce supply by saying the supply curve tells us how much producers are willing to supply, how much they're willing to put on the market for different possible prices. Well, that's still a supply curve here. And what that means is that the exercise I want to start to have is let's try different prices. Let's try different prices, send those prices as signals out, and see how when the price changes, the individual producer changes his or her optimal output. And we'll say, all right, let's try a different price. We'll call this price P1, and it would have MR1. And the result would be the firm would go to where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, back at that point. It always goes to marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That always maximizes its profit. And again, this price is greater than average variable cost. So even though the firm may be losing money, in the short run, this is the best thing to do. Keep slugging it out. And they may, in fact, depending on where I drew the average cost curve, they could still be making money here, positive economic profits. We don't know. How about trying a different price? We'll call this P2, and that would be MR2. And now Q star for price of 2 is out here. Now, you can see that what's happening here. As I vary price, the signal from the market comes in parametric to the producer, because the producer is, by constraints of this particular market, the perfectly competitive market, the producer is a price taker. That's a horizontal marginal revenue curve. So for every possible price you might call out here, that line goes across. And you can see what happens. For different possible prices, what we're ending up doing is this whole locus of points along that upward sloping marginal cost curve at or above the average variable cost curve is in fact the short run supply curve for an individual firm. The short run supply for an individual firm in a competitive market is that portion of MC at or above AVC. That portion of the marginal cost curve, at or above the average variable cost curve, tells the firm exactly when it should stop producing. If price goes up, you can see they're going to produce a little more. They're going to produce a little more, but because they're getting a higher price. But of course, because of the law of diminishing marginal product that we established before when we did costs, if they're going to produce more, it's going to get increasingly more expensive. So at some point, they're going to stop. Just think about this point Q sub 2. At the point Q sub 2, the firm doesn't want to go any farther out, because if the firm were to produce one more unit of this product, the extra revenue of that unit would be less than the extra cost of producing that. That's not good. Money in your cash register is going down. Also, you don't want to stop short of that, because the extra revenue, if you're here, is greater than the extra cost. Go ahead and produce a little more. Only when you focus in right on that point have you maximized the residuals to your firm, and that's what you want to do.